Hey, welcome. Today, we're going to break down a really important concept in the tech world, how different apps actually talk to each other over the internet. It's kind of like this secret magic that makes our digital lives work. And we're about to show you exactly how it's done by looking at two major players, SOAP and REST. Seriously, think about it for a second. You pop up in a weather app and boom, there's the forecast for the next 5 days. How in the world does that happen? Well, that app is talking to a server somewhere to grab that data. And the conversation is managed by something called an API, an application programming interface. Today, we're diving into the two main ways to build these APIs, the classic SOAP and the modern REST. All right, first up, let's talk about SOAP. The best way to think of SOAP is as the older, more traditional approach. It's been around the block, and it's all about formality and following a very strict set of rules. It definitely likes to do things by the book. So, what is it exactly? SOAP stands for Simple Object Access Protocol. And the two key things you really got to remember here are that it's a protocol, which means a very rigid set of rules, and it only uses XML to format its messages. It's like two people agreeing to speak a language that has an extremely strict grammar, no exceptions. Here's the easy way to understand this. Using SOAP is a lot like sending a package through registered mail. You have to use their specific box. You have to fill out all the forms in a very precise way, and you gotta follow the procedure to the letter. Yeah, it's a little more work, but in return, you get incredible reliability and proof that it was delivered correctly. Now, when we say strict structure, this is what we're talking about. Every single SOAP message is constructed the same way. It's always wrapped in what's called an envelope. Inside that envelope, you might have a header for extra info. You'll definitely have a body with the actual request. And if anything goes wrong, a fault section pops up to tell you about the error. And here's what that looks like in the real world. See that envelope tag wrapping the whole thing? And right inside, the body is holding the actual request, which in this case is get price for some apples. It's a bit wordy for sure, but you can't deny that it's extremely clear. There's zero ambiguity about what's being asked. Okay, so you might be wondering, how on earth do I know how to format that message just right? That's where this thing called WSDL comes in. A WSDL file is basically the user manual, or you could even call it a legal contract for the API. It tells you exactly what functions are available, what kind of data they need, and what you'll get back. It's the official rulebook you have to follow. So it all comes down to a big trade-off. On the one hand, SOAP is super secure and incredibly reliable. That's exactly why it's still the go-to for a lot of big enterprise systems like in banking or finance. But on the other hand, all that structure makes it really complex, it's slower because XML is so heavy, and honestly, it can be a total nightmare to debug when things go wrong. Now that we've covered the formal world of SOAP, let's completely switch gears and look at its younger, more flexible cousin. Let's talk about REST, which is an architectural style that was basically born from the way the web already works. You see, unlike SOAP, REST isn't a strict protocol. It's more of a philosophy, a set of guiding principles. It's all about simple ideas, like keeping the client and server separate, making sure the server doesn't have to remember past conversations. We call that stateless, and we'll get into that in a sec, and using the tools of the web, mainly HTTP, as its foundation. Okay, so if SOAP was our formal registered letter, then REST is just like browsing the web. Every single time you click a link, you're making a simple, independent request to a URL, and you get something back, like a web page. It's a much more natural, direct, and lightweight way of communicating. The absolute heart of REST is this idea of a resource. Now, a resource can be literally anything: a user profile, a product in a store, a photo. And every single resource gets its own unique URL, something like api.com/users/123. You then use standard web verbs like get to read it, or post to create a new one, or delete to get rid of it. Simple. Now, let's talk about one of REST's most important principles. It's stateless. What this means is that every single request you send to the server has to contain all the information the server needs to do its job. The server doesn't remember a thing about who you are or what you asked for a second ago. To make that crystal clear, think of it this way. A stateless server is like talking to someone with no short-term memory. Every single time you say something, you have to reintroduce yourself and give the full context all over again. It might sound a little strange, but it actually makes the system way simpler and much easier to scale up, because any server can handle any request at any time. And here's another game changer. Remember how SOAP was completely locked into using XML? Well, REST is super flexible. It can use XML if you really want it to, but the overwhelming favorite these days is JSON, JavaScript Object Notation. Why? Because it's way lighter, it's easier for us humans to read, and it's much faster for computers to process. It's just perfect for modern web and mobile apps. All right, we've gotten to know both of them pretty well. Now it's time for the final showdown. Let's put SOAP and REST head to head to really make the differences stick. This table just sums it all up perfectly, doesn't it? SOAP is a strict protocol. REST is a flexible architectural style. SOAP forces you to use XML. REST lets you choose, but really prefers the lightweight JSON. SOAP depends on a formal WSDL contract, while REST just uses the simple, everyday standards of HTTP. It really is registered post versus just visiting a website. So after all that, what's the big takeaway for you? Well, if you're just starting out or you're building a new web or mobile application, REST is almost always going to be your best bet. It's just so much simpler, way more flexible, and you can get up and running with it a heck of a lot faster. So there you have it, the core differences between SOAP and REST. But building an API is just step one. How do you actually make sure it's secure? Well, that's a whole other can of worms. And it's the topic for our next explainer, where we'll do a deep dive into authentication with OAuth. Hope to see you there.